What would you do if you walked into your own funeral and saw the people you loved crying over a coffin that didn't hold you? I stood there. One, 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 drenched in rain, staring at the marble steps of St. Mary's Church. And for a moment I almost believed I was the ghost they all thought I was. The air smelled of wet roses and cheap perfume. Through the open doors I could hear the choir singing a hymn I used to hate. Inside, hundreds of faces turned toward the altar, where a dark oak coffin rested under a silver cross. My name was carved into the plaque. Michael Reed. 1984, 2023. I took a breath and stepped inside. Every sound in the church faded. I could see my father standing at the podium, voice trembling as he read a eulogy from a folded sheet of paper. My mother sat in the first row, tears streaking her cheeks. My younger brother Daniel stood beside her, shoulders stiff, face pale. And then there was Emily, my wife, dressed in black silk, veil over her eyes, holding a single white rose like she was posing for a magazine cover. Next to her stood Mark Halden, the man who had been circling my company for years, the man I once warned her about. I kept walking. The wooden floor creaked beneath my boots. Someone gasped. A woman dropped her purse. The organ stopped playing mid-note. I reached the center aisle and took off my hood. For a second, nobody moved. Emily blinked, her lips parting. My father's face drained of color. Daniel whispered something under his breath that sounded like my name. They had buried me once already. At least on paper. They forged the documents, held a memorial, and divided everything I built. Now they had to face the man they killed for money. I looked around the room, at the photos of me smiling beside company logos and awards. They had turned my death into a show. Every detail looked rehearsed. Even the way Emily tilted her head toward Mark when someone spoke to her. I stopped beside the coffin and placed my hand on it. The wood was cold. Inside was an empty box filled with stones. Just enough weight to fool the guests. My breath felt heavy, my heart steady. I didn't come here for revenge. I came for the truth. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Michael, how is this possible? I met his eyes. That's what I want to know too. Dad, maybe you can tell me. My mother covered her mouth. Daniel took a step back, glancing at Emily like he wanted her to speak first. She didn't. She swayed once, twice, then collapsed into Mark's arms. Someone screamed. Cameras flashed. The priest stammered something about calling the police. But I raised a hand. No need. They'll be here soon. I already called them. Gasps filled the room. Reporters whispered my name, snapping photos. I could see confusion in their eyes, half fear, half curiosity. I turned toward the guests. Thank you all for coming to celebrate my life. I'm sorry the guest of honor showed up uninvited. Laughter rippled nervously through the crowd, then died as I continued. But since we're all here, maybe it's time to talk about what really happened 2 months ago in Florida. My father looked like he might faint. My mother's hands trembled. Daniel mumbled something about mistakes and bad timing. I didn't give them time to think. I leaned closer to the coffin and whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. You thought I drowned. You thought the ocean would keep your secret. But the ocean gave me back. For a moment, I felt every eye in the room on me, the weight of their guilt pressing down. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the stained glass windows like a heartbeat. Emily stirred on the floor, her veil slipping off. She looked at me like I was something pulled from hell. Her lips moved, but no words came out. I crouched beside her, speaking quietly so only she could hear. You didn't even wait a month. Did you? Her eyes filled with tears. I stood up, straightened my coat, and turned back to the crowd. You all believed the story. You wanted to. A tragic accident. A loving wife. A grieving family. That's what sells papers. Right? The priest stepped forward, voice shaking. Son, this isn't the place. I looked him straight in the eye. You're right, Father, but it's the perfect stage. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. I knew Agent Cole would be there soon, ready to take control. Everything was set. The documents, the recordings, the witnesses. I'd spent weeks gathering it all. This was only the beginning. As the doors burst open and uniformed officers entered, I took one last look at my family. My father frozen. My mother sobbing. My brother shaking. My wife barely conscious. You wanted me gone. I said quietly. Now you get to live with me instead. The cameras flashed again. Blinding white. The officers shouted for everyone to stay seated. I stepped back, breathing in the thick scent of lilies and fear. I wasn't there to hurt anyone. Not yet. I just wanted them to see me alive, to feel what it's like when the ghost they buried walks back through the door. As they led me outside, rain pouring down my face, I could still hear the murmurs echoing inside the church. Some said miracle. Some said madness. Only one word really fit. Justice. And it had only just begun. The sound of the rain followed me even after the police car doors closed. They didn't cuff me. They didn't say much either. The officers had already been briefed by Agent Cole. He stood outside the church entrance under a black umbrella, watching as the crowd of reporters swarmed behind the yellow tape. When our eyes met through the car window, he gave a small nod. It wasn't sympathy. It was understanding. I leaned back and stared at my reflection in the glass. My hair was longer, streaked with salt and gray. My face looked like a man who had lived 10 years in 2 months. The city outside blurred past, soaked in neon and rain. For a moment I wondered if I had really come back, or if I was still floating somewhere under the waves, dreaming about revenge. They took me to a small government building near downtown. Inside, Cole was waiting in a dim interrogation room with 2 cups of coffee. He slid one toward me. You sure picked a hell of a way to return, he said. I told you I wasn't ready to be buried. He almost smiled. Then sat across from me. Let's start from the beginning. Florida. Tell me everything. I closed my eyes and tried to remember that morning in Florida Keys. Before everything went black. It was supposed to be a family vacation. My father said it would clear the air. That we needed to reconnect after all the tension at Reed Tech. Daniel was running the marketing division, and we'd been clashing over budget issues. Emily wanted to come along to recharge. Though she spent most of her time on the phone with investors, my mother, as always, just wanted everyone to look happy. We stayed at a resort that smelled like sunscreen and money. Every morning, I'd wake to the sound of waves and the muffled ping of incoming emails. The first few days were calm enough. Then Daniel started talking business over breakfast, pretending it was casual. He said maybe it was time I took a step back. Let him handle more of the company. I laughed it off. But he didn't. He just stared at me, jaw tight, like a man rehearsing for a confrontation. By the 4th day, the tension was thick. Emily stopped pretending to care. She spent hours by the pool, texting someone who never replied in front of me. I asked once who it was. She said it was her cousin. She didn't have a cousin named Mark. But I didn't push it. That evening, my father announced we'd all go diving the next morning. Said it would be good for the soul. I agreed because I didn't want another argument. The sea had always been where I could think. I had no idea it would be where they'd try to end me. At sunrise, we drove out to the docks. The sky was pink and quiet. Daniel joked about how he hoped I didn't outdive him. My mother kissed my cheek like it was a goodbye. Emily stood at the edge of the boat, sunglasses hiding her eyes. I remember checking my oxygen tank twice. It hissed clean and steady. Daniel offered to swap the valve since mine looked a little rusty. I told him it was fine. But he insisted, so I let him. I didn't think twice. Why would I? We dropped into the water together. 4 divers in a line. The world below was silent blue. Fish scattered around the coral. I followed Daniel deeper. 30 feet. 40. Then, suddenly, the hiss stopped. I tapped my gauge. Nothing. My lungs squeezed tight. I looked up. Daniel was above me, his fins moving slowly, his eyes meeting mine through the glass of his mask. He didn't move closer. He just floated there, watching. I kicked upward, panicking, trying to reach him. My throat burned. The world blurred white. The last thing I saw was his silhouette turning away, heading for the surface. When I woke up, it was night. The taste of salt in my mouth. I was lying on a beach, coughing up water. A lantern light flickered beside me. An old man's voice said, "Easy now. You're safe." Jacob Miles was his name, a retired sailor who lived alone on Sainted Winslow Island. He found me washed up at the edge of the reef, half dead, and carried me to his hut. My head was bleeding. My ribs felt broken. I asked where I was. He said off the map, and smiled like it was a joke. The first week I could barely move. Jacob fed me soup that tasted like seawater and rum. When I tried to stand, he said, "Rest. You cheated death. Don't rush to meet it again." I told him I couldn't remember much. He said, "Memory's like the tide. It comes back when it's ready." Days passed. We fished, fixed nets, listened to the radio. Sometimes at night, I'd stare at the horizon, trying to remember why I felt angry at something I couldn't name. One afternoon, the radio crackled. A news anchor's voice broke through the static. Tech entrepreneur Michael Reed presumed dead after diving accident in Florida Keys. Funeral to be held in Seattle. Survived by wife Emily and brother Daniel. The spoon slipped from my hand. The bowl shattered on the floor. Jacob turned off the radio. Eyes sharp. "Guess you remember now," he said quietly. I did. Every second of it. The look Daniel gave me before swimming away. Emily's cold smile. The way my father hugged me that morning, whispering, "Family first." I couldn't breathe. My pulse hammered in my ears. I stumbled outside, fell to my knees in the sand. Jacob followed, saying nothing. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely a whisper. "They killed me." He nodded slowly. Then he handed me a small knife, dull and rusted from salt. "You can go back with this," he said. "Or you can go back with your head. The first will get you killed. The second might get you justice." That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, staring at the stars. Somewhere out there was the life they stole. The company I built. The name they used to cash in insurance money. I wasn't ready to face them yet. I needed to plan. Before dawn, I packed what little I had. Jacob gave me a compass and half a loaf of bread. The sea was calm, but the wind sharp. He asked if I was sure. I said if I stayed, I'd die as the man they made me. If I left, maybe I could live as the man I used to be. He smiled, showing the few teeth he had left. "Then don't look back. The ocean doesn't forgive hesitation." I climbed into his old fishing boat and pushed off. The island shrank behind me until it disappeared into the fog. The sun rose, gold against the horizon. I held the compass tight, pointing north, toward Florida, toward Seattle, toward the people who had buried me alive. The waves slapped against the hull, slow and steady. For the first time since I woke up on that beach, I felt something close to peace. I wasn't coming home to forgive. I was coming home to remind them I was still here. I slept in 2-hour bursts, waking to the sound of the hull tapping the water like a slow clock. The sun climbed, burned, then slid down again. I kept the compass to my chest and the horizon in front of me, counting the beats between each wave to stay calm. Salt dried on my skin. My lips cracked. I rationed Jacob's bread and the water until the Florida coast finally rose from the haze like a faded memory. A rusted trawler cut across my path on the second morning. I waved the oar in the air and the captain leaned over the rail. A broad man with a cigarette stuck to his lip. He shouted something about being crazy and hauled me up with a rope the way you might pull a stubborn anchor. He studied my face as I climbed over the rail, then decided I was not a threat. Just a fool the ocean had not finished with. He gave me a bottle of water and a greasy sandwich and let me ride the last miles to Key West. I told him my name was John. He did not ask for a last name. On the dock, I felt the ground sway under my feet, as if the sea still had me. I walked until the trawler's diesel stink faded, and the streets opened into a strip of souvenir shops and nameless bars. Tourists laughed under umbrellas. A band played an old rock song somewhere. Nothing had changed, and everything had. I found a thrift store with a flickering sign and bought jeans, a gray hoodie, and a cheap baseball cap. In a barber shop next door, a kid with tattooed knuckles took clippers to my hair, while a talk radio host argued about tech stocks on a tinny speaker. When the kid spun the chair around, the man in the mirror looked like a version of me who slept behind bus stations. That was good. That was safe. I needed a phone and a place to disappear. A pawn shop provided the first. A prepaid brick with a scratched screen. The second was a motel with a broken ice machine and a manager who charged cash and did not want to hear stories. The room smelled like mildew and lemon cleaner. I locked the door, drew the curtains, sat on the bed, and listened to the air conditioner cough itself awake. My hands shook as I powered up the phone. I typed my own name into the browser and felt the room tilt. Headlines filled the screen. Seattle tech founder presumed dead. Reed Tech future uncertain as family grieves. There was a photo from our last product launch. Me holding a microphone with the logo behind me, smiling like the world could only get better. Another article quoted Daniel as interim leader, promising stability. He wore my suit. He used my words. I needed more than headlines. I tucked the phone into my pocket and walked 3 blocks to a strip mall with a laundromat and an internet cafe that smelled like instant noodles and dust. Half the computers were broken. The other half ran slow. I paid for an hour and sat at the far end where the camera could not see my screen. I started with filings. Reed Tech Investor Relations had posted a statement about continuity. Daniel Reed, acting as interim chief. Board support. Strategic partnership under review. The partner's name felt like a punch. Halden Capital. Mark had waited years for an opening, and death was the best opening money could buy. I checked the county records for Seattle. Probate mentions. Emergency court orders. There it was. An expedited petition for the distribution of assets due to presumption of death. My name appeared in black letters beside words like estate and distribution and percentage. Emily listed as surviving spouse. Daniel as interested party. My parents as additional parties. All efficiently filed, stamped, and in motion. I opened a new tab and searched for Emily. Images first. She was at a charity gala in New York. A lattice of lights behind her. Mark a half step away with his hand near the small of her back. She was smiling, the smile she used for interviews. All grace and control. The caption said she was honoring my legacy. I memorized the dress and the angle of her chin, and the way her eyes were flat as glass. I stared at the clock. 40 minutes left on the session. I needed someone I could trust. That list had burned down to ash. But one name still glowed. Tom Jensen. Law school with me at Oregon. Then a sharp corporate lawyer in Seattle, before starting his own practice. We had not spoken much in the last 2 years. I had been too busy and too arrogant. He had never asked me for anything. I set up a new email under the name John Larkin and typed his firm's address. I kept it simple. A client needs urgent confirmation of a life insurance payout associated with Michael Reed of Seattle. Policy held with National Life and Property. Beneficiary, Emily Carter Reed. Please confirm status and timeline if public. I signed it with a made-up consulting firm and added a disposable phone number. I walked back to the motel and tried to sleep. The phone buzzed just after midnight. Tom wrote back 10 words. Not public, but I will check first thing morning. The old trust stirred in my chest. It felt dangerous and necessary. I woke before dawn. Jogged in place beside the bed to keep from screaming. Then showered until the water turned cold. The phone rang at 9. I answered and heard Tom's steady voice. The one he used in court when he was about to corner a witness. The payout was initiated 2 weeks after the incident. $5 million. He paused and let that hang. The application relied on a presumption of death filing and a notarized statement from a Florida coroner. He paused again. The coroner's signature does not match known samples. This smells wrong. Mike. Where are you? I swallowed and told him I was safe. I told him I could not say more yet. Can you help me without alerting anyone? He said he could and he would, and then he spoke like a friend again. I knew you were too stubborn to die. After the call, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the anger come and go like a tide. When it ebbed, I could think. I made a list. Cash. Transport. Documents. Information. Then I worked the list. Cash first. I sold Jacob's old boat to a man at the marina for a few $100s and an extra jug of gas he insisted I take. I thanked him. Transport second. I bought a seat on a bus that smelled like coffee and plastic and pointed it toward Miami. Then Atlanta. Then all the way to Seattle. Planes were faster. But planes noticed you. Buzzes just moved. On the ride north, I kept my head down. I watched fathers hold sleeping kids and construction workers nap with their hands folded over their chests. I turned my wedding ring in my fingers until the skin beneath it went white, then slid it into my pocket. At night, the bus windows became mirrors, and I spoke to the man staring back. You built something once. You can build again. Start with the truth. In Atlanta, I changed buses and phones. In Denver, I shaved in a bathroom sink and threw the razor away. Somewhere in Idaho, a woman asked if I was going home. I said yes and left it there. When Seattle finally appeared, gray and familiar, I felt nothing like relief. The city looked older. Or maybe it was me. I got off near the stadium and walked to a pawn shop I used back when ReedTech needed short bridges between paychecks. The owner remembered my face but not where from. I bought a used laptop with a sticky spacebar and a cheap camera. I asked about a storage unit. He gave me a number written on a receipt and said, "Tell Eddie I sent you." Eddie rented me a unit the size of a closet at the edge of an industrial park. I put the laptop on an overturned milk crate and sat on the concrete floor while the overhead light hummed. I logged into a backdoor account I had forgotten I built years ago for disaster recovery. The credentials still worked. ReedTech had not scrubbed every ghost I left behind. The archive server greeted me with old file trees and security logs. I mapped what had changed since the day of the dive. Access patterns showed Daniel's login more active than his job required. A shared folder labeled Planning contained drafts of presentations to Halden Capital. The dates matched the week after the accident. A subfolder held scanned documents. One was a power of attorney that looked like my signature until you looked at the pressure points. Forgers love the shape and miss the weight. I downloaded everything to the laptop and an external drive I had picked up at the pawn shop. My hands started to steady. Facts are ballast. They keep you upright when the sea is trying to flip you. I needed eyes inside the company. I texted a number I had not used in a year. Rachel Nguyen. She covered business for the Seattle Chronicle and owed me nothing, which was exactly why I could trust her to do her job. I told her there were irregularities in a local tech firm's filings and asked if she still took tips from anonymous sources. Her reply came fast. Always. I said I would send documents soon and to be careful with her inbox. She sent back a single word. Understood. Night pushed through the dirty plastic skylight of the storage unit. I ate a granola bar from a vending machine and washed it down with warm water. I studied the map of ReadTech's headquarters on my screen. The server room had moved since we grew. The basement had new cameras. My old badge would probably trip one door before it failed. I pictured the route from the loading dock to the archive terminal and the closet where we kept the decommissioned workstations. I traced it with my finger until it felt like muscle memory. My phone lit up with a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail and then listened. A man's voice. Calm. Professional. Agent Cole Adams with National Life and Property. I would like to speak with whoever sent documents regarding a fraudulent claim tied to Michael Reed. Please call back from a safe line. I leaned back against the cinder block wall and watched my breath fog in the cold air. The room smelled like dust and old cardboard. I thought of Jacob's Island and the way the sea sounded at night. I thought of my father's eyes at the church and the way Daniel did not move in the water. I thought of Emily's hand on Mark's arm in that photo. I turned the phone in my hand until it caught the light. Then I powered it down and slid it into the pocket of my hoodie. Tomorrow I would call Cole from a payphone and set the first meeting on my terms. Tonight I would sleep on the floor beside the evidence and let the hum of the light be the ocean. The city outside kept breathing. Somewhere a siren wailed and then fell away. I closed my eyes and pictured the lobby of ReadTech. The wall of glass. The receptionist who always wore neon sneakers on Fridays. I pictured walking through those doors again and hearing the quiet click of my shoes on the tile. Not yet. First the servers. Then, the proof. Then I would let the truth speak for itself. Morning slipped in gray through the crack of the storage unit door. My back ached from the concrete floor. I sat up and stretched until my shoulders popped. Then wiped the dust from my laptop and booted it again. The files were all still there. Row after row of proof, waiting to breathe. Today, I would take the first step inside ReadTech. I walked to a diner 2 blocks from the industrial park. The coffee was burnt. The eggs runny. But the waitress called me honey and didn't look twice at the tired stranger in a hoodie. I used the booth's outlet to charge my phone. Then found the nearest payphone listed on an old city map taped to the wall. It stood beside a bus stop, where nobody cared who you were. When I dialed Cole's number, the line clicked twice before his voice came on. You're a hard man to track. I told him that was the point. He said he'd looked into the insurance claim. And his department was already suspicious. I asked what he needed. He said evidence that connected the fake death to the beneficiaries. I told him I had more than enough. But I wanted to handle it quietly. He hesitated. If you try to go this alone, you might end up actually dead. I said I was already there once. Let me do this my way. After a long pause, he agreed to meet me that night. Behind a hardware store off Rainier Avenue. Midnight. No tales. I hung up before he could ask where I'd been. The rest of the day, I prepared. I bought a used backpack from a thrift store. Filled it with the drive. Gloves, and a flashlight. At sunset, I stood across from ReadTech's new headquarters. 12 floors of glass and steel. The logo I designed 10 years ago still glowed blue at the top. I had dreamed of that building when the company was just a garage with 2 desks and 1 leaky roof. Now it felt like a stranger wearing my face. Security had changed since I left. Cameras at every corner. Motion sensors near the loading dock. But people don't change as fast as systems. I watched the night crew for an hour. The janitor on duty took smoke breaks every 40 minutes, leaving the side door ajar. Same habit as before. I waited for his next round, then slipped through when he turned the corner. Inside, the air smelled like new paint and recycled air. My sneakers made no sound on the polished concrete. I pulled my cap lower and moved down the hall to the archive room. The security badge in my pocket, the one I'd kept in a desk drawer at home, buzzed when it touched the reader. For a second, I thought it would reject me. Then the light blinked green. The server racks hummed like a heartbeat. Blue lights flickered in the dark. I sat at an unused terminal, plugged in my drive, and started copying files from the internal backup I'd mapped the night before. The transfer bar crawled slowly. Each percent an eternity. I watched the reflection of the hallway through the glass door. My pulse matched the hum of the fans. Halfway through, footsteps echoed from the stairwell. I froze. The door handle rattled. Someone entered carrying a tablet and a cup of coffee. I ducked behind a row of racks. It was Daniel. His hair slicked back. His face thinner. Older. But his walk still had that same nervous energy. He muttered to himself. Scrolling through something on the screen, he stopped near my terminal, frowning at the glow. My breath caught. He set the cup down, tapped the keyboard once, and the screen came alive. I saw my folder open for half a second before I yanked the flash drive out. The screen froze, then went black. He cursed under his breath and hit the key again. Nothing. He sighed, picked up his coffee, and left, mumbling about another power surge. I waited until the door shut before moving. My shirt was soaked with sweat. When the last file finished copying, I shut the terminal down, erased the temporary logs, and slipped out the same way I came. The night air hit me like cold water. I kept walking until the building was 3 blocks behind me. Only then did I breathe normally. By the time I reached the hardware store, the sky had turned black. Cole was already there, leaning against an old sedan with government plates. He wore a windbreaker and an expression that said he'd seen worse but not by much. I handed him the flash drive. He scanned the folders briefly on his laptop, whistling low. Power of attorney. Forged. Insurance request with a fake coroner signature. Emails with Halden Capital discussing valuation before the funeral. This is enough to make the bureau twitch. I told him it was only part of the picture. I needed to know how deep the rot went before the public saw it. He nodded slowly. I can run background verification and pull the coroner's statement. But you should be careful. Read. If they smell you, they'll panic. I smiled faintly. Let them. Panic makes people talk. He closed the laptop. There's one more thing. The board filed to finalize the merger with Halden Capital in 2 weeks. If you want your company back, that's your window. After that, it's gone. The words hit harder than I expected. 2 weeks. I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked back into the rain. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement like melted gold. I rented another motel room that night. A different side of town. The mattress sagged. The heater clanked. But it felt like a command post. I laid the documents across the bed, sorting through the chain of signatures, tracing the money trail. Daniel had signed everything on my behalf. Emily had witnessed it. My father's name appeared on the secondary accounts that collected the initial disbursement. I found one transfer that stood out. A private holding registered to Halden himself. $2 million. Description: consulting fee. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper. Circled it twice. It wasn't just greed. It was coordination. Around 3 a.m. I stopped working and stared out the window. The streets were empty except for the reflection of a neon sign from a closed diner. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train moaned. My thoughts drifted back to that day on the boat. To the way Daniel had looked down at me through the water. I had wanted to believe it was hesitation, not cruelty. Now I knew better. The plan began to form in pieces. The church would be the stage. The documents would be the proof. I didn't know yet how it would end. But I knew where it had to start. As dawn began to wash over the skyline, I packed everything into the backpack, zipped it shut, and whispered to the room like a promise. They thought they buried me. They forgot I know how to dig. The first bus of the morning hissed to a stop outside. I stepped onto it. Blending with the early workers and the sleepless drifters. The rain had stopped. But the clouds still pressed low over Seattle. I looked out the window at the streets I once drove every day. The same city that built me and betrayed me. The wheels started rolling again, carrying me closer to the next move. Closer to the moment they'd see the ghost they created standing in the light. The city slid by in silence. Wet glass and tired faces reflected in the bus window. Seattle always looked washed out after the rain. But that morning, it felt like the whole place was holding its breath. I gripped the strap of my backpack and thought about the man I used to be. Michael Reed. CEO. Husband. Brother. Son. Now, I was just a name that didn't belong to anyone. When I got off near downtown, the air smelled like damp concrete and coffee. I walked 3 blocks to an all-night diner that faced the Reed Tech Tower. Through the big windows I could see the lobby guards starting their shift. They didn't know I was alive. And for now, that was my only advantage. I ordered black coffee and eggs I didn't eat, keeping my eyes on the reflection of the building in the glass. I spent most of that day building a map in my head, connecting the people who had turned my death into a business transaction. Daniel was the executor of the estate. Emily had control of the liquid assets. My parents, Richard and Linda, had taken their cut and vanished from the media after a few interviews about grief and legacy. The money trail split 4 ways. But all roads led to Mark Halden. I needed to see him up close. That evening, I changed into the kind of clothes no one remembers: dark jacket, jeans, cheap shoes. Halden's name appeared on a list of guests for a private investors event at the Fairmont. I waited by the side entrance, pretending to check my phone while security scanned invitations. When Halden stepped out of his black car, I caught a glimpse of him under the streetlight. Tall, silver hair slicked back. The kind of smile that sold bad ideas to rich men. Emily followed, her hand brushing his arm. She laughed at something he said. I hadn't heard that laugh since before our wedding. They walked inside. I waited 5 minutes, then slipped in through the kitchen service hallway. A busboy glanced at me and kept moving. The ballroom smelled of champagne and expensive suits. I stayed near the back, just close enough to hear Halden's voice as he spoke to a group of investors. He was bragging about Reed Tech's stability, about Daniel's leadership, about how tragedy had given the company a chance to evolve. He used my death as a selling point. Every word tightened in my chest like wire. Emily stood beside him, radiant, polished. Someone asked how she was doing. She smiled and said she was learning to heal, focusing on philanthropy. I wanted to walk straight up and ask if healing meant sleeping beside the man who signed off on my murder. Instead, I left. The air outside felt cleaner, sharper. That night in the motel, I opened the laptop again and played the audio I had recorded on my phone from the ballroom. I replayed her voice, steady and charming. Then Halden's promise to finalize the merger. My plan was taking shape. But I needed one more piece, proof that they had known I was alive before the payout. I called Tom from a payphone the next morning. He picked up on the second ring. "You're making the news again," he said quietly. "The insurance division's starting to panic. Cole's running cross-checks with the coroner's office. The name on the report is real, but the license number belongs to a doctor who died 5 years ago. That was the opening I needed. How long until we can make it public?" "Not yet," he said. "If they find out you're alive before we're ready, they'll destroy evidence. Let Cole finish the verification. Then we move." I agreed, though patience was the hardest thing I had left. For the next few days I watched them from a distance. Daniel's apartment near the marina, Emily's condo uptown, my parents' house in the suburbs. They lived their new lives like nothing had happened. I stood across the street from my parents' house one night, watching the light flicker in the living room. My mother sat by the window, reading. My father watched TV. They looked smaller than I remembered. I almost knocked on the door. Then I saw the framed photo on the shelf behind them. It was of me, smiling, beside Daniel. They hadn't removed it. Guilt is a kind of shrine, too. I turned away before I could start to believe it meant something. Back at the motel, Cole called from an encrypted number. "We've got it," he said. "The coroner's report, the wire transfers, everything. You can end this right now if you want." I told him, not yet. I wanted them all in one place. He hesitated. "You have 2 weeks before the merger closes. After that, your company belongs to Halden." That was all I needed to hear. I reached out to Rachel Nguyen, the reporter I had tipped earlier. I sent her redacted copies of the forged documents with a message: "Watch the Brooks family case next week. It will make headlines." She replied within minutes. "I trust you. Be careful." The next day, I went to Reed Tech again. Not to break in this time, but to watch Daniel. He arrived late, wearing a tailored suit and sunglasses, though the sky was gray. He looked nervous. Maybe Halden had started pressuring him. I followed him from the parking garage to a coffee shop across the street. He sat in a corner booth with Emily and Halden. I took a seat by the window, pulled out my phone, and recorded through the reflection. The conversation started soft, then rose. Daniel's voice cracked. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "If they find out, I'm done." Emily leaned closer, whispering something that made him flinch. Halden's tone was colder. "You finish the merger, and we're all done. You get your share. You open your mouth. You lose everything." It was enough. I stayed until they left, my pulse steady, my coffee untouched. When I listened to the playback later that night, I knew it was the last piece. The plan was no longer about survival. It was about exposure. Cole met me again in the same parking lot 2 nights later. He listened to the audio, eyes hard. "This will destroy them. Are you ready for that?" I thought about Jacob on the island, the sound of waves against the rocks. I thought about the silence underwater, the last breath that never came. They destroyed themselves the moment they touched that valve. He closed the folder. "Then, do it clean. I'll be there when it starts." I nodded. The funeral had already been announced. A second memorial. This time organized by the family for shareholders, complete with press coverage and investors in attendance. They needed a public goodbye to finalize the sale. They didn't know I'd be their guest of honor. That night, I wrote a letter. It wasn't a confession. It was a statement. I explained where I had been, how I survived, what they did, and how the truth would come out. I sealed it in an envelope addressed to Cole. Just in case. The morning of the funeral. I dressed in black, pulled on gloves, and tucked the documents inside my coat. The streets were slick from rain. Outside St. Mary's. Cameras flashed, and microphones swarmed. I stood behind a tree across the road and watched as my parents arrived. Hands clasped, pretending unity. Then Daniel stepped out of a black car, pale and sweating. Emily followed, perfect as ever, her hand resting on Halden's arm. I checked my watch. 10 minutes to start. My heart was steady now. Revenge wasn't heat anymore. It was precision. When the first bell rang and the doors closed, I crossed the street. The reporters barely noticed me until I was halfway up the steps. The scent of lilies hit me again. Same as the first time. Inside, the organ started to play. I kept walking toward the sound, toward the life they'd stolen, ready to reclaim it in front of everyone who had sold me for profit. The air inside the church was heavy, thick with incense and money. I could taste the perfume of lilies and fear mixed together. People turned their heads when the doors creaked behind me, expecting a late guest. Not a dead man. My shoes echoed on the marble aisle. I walked past faces frozen halfway between prayer and shock. Every camera in the back turned toward me. The coffin was at the center again. Darker this time. Polished like a lie. My name gleamed on a brass plate. I stopped in front of it and let the silence settle. My parents sat in the front row, holding hands like actors who forgot their lines. Daniel was to their right, tie crooked, sweat shining at his temple. Emily stood near the altar beside Halden. Radiant, cold. I took off my hood. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered my name. The priest froze mid-sentence, eyes wide. I looked at them all and said calmly that I appreciated the effort. But I wasn't ready to die yet. Emily's face drained of color. Her hand slipped from Halden's arm. My father half stood, his lips trembling. Michael. My mother covered her mouth, sobbing, though it sounded more like panic than joy. Daniel whispered something that broke into a stutter, his fingers gripping the edge of the pew. I walked closer to the altar. My voice was steady. You buried me alive. Now you get to watch me breathe. Reporters surged forward. Flashlights burst like lightning. The priest tried to quiet them, shouting for order. But the crowd was too loud. The air buzzed with disbelief. Emily stumbled backward. She looked around for Halden. But he had already moved toward the exit. I caught his arm as he passed. Going somewhere. Mark. He froze, his polite mask cracking. I said you'd regret using my death for profit. He tried to smile. This is absurd. Some kind of sick joke. I pulled the envelope from my coat and threw it onto the coffin. It burst open, spilling the forged papers across the floor. My power of attorney. My signature copied and flattened. The proof of their conspiracy in black and white. Reporters dove for them like vultures. Cole stepped in from the back, flashing his badge, shouting for everyone to stay where they were. The room shifted from chaos to stunned silence. He crossed the aisle to me, nodding once, his voice low. You sure you want to do this here? I said this is where they wanted to end me. Feels right to start again. The judge from the probate case was in the front row. A family friend who had come to pay his respects. He stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. Is this true? Mr. Reed, are you claiming to be alive? I smiled faintly. Claiming. No. Proving. Cole handed him the verification report from the bureau. DNA. Fingerprints. Everything. The judge scanned the page, his mouth tightening. The court will recess all ongoing estate proceedings effective immediately. he said loudly enough for the cameras to catch. The noise exploded. Reporters shouted questions. Photographers climbed on pews. My parents sat frozen. My mother started to cry harder, whispering prayers under her breath. My father stared at me like I was a ghost that refused to vanish. Daniel tried to stand, muttering that it was impossible, that this had to be staged. I turned to him, my voice low enough that only he could hear. I saw you check my tank. Daniel, I saw your eyes before I blacked out. He shook his head violently. That wasn't me. You have to believe me. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the sweat on his skin. Believe you. I did once. Emily found her voice again. You're insane. You nearly ruined this family with your paranoia. Look at you. Showing up like some lunatic to destroy everything we built. We built. I laughed. But there was no humor in it. You and Halden built a future on my corpse. Cole signaled his team. And 2 agents moved to the side aisles. He told the judge they had warrants ready for the fraudulent insurance claim and the forgery charges. Halden tried to slip out again, but the agents blocked him. One reached into his coat and pulled out his phone, handing it to Cole. Emily turned pale as marble. My father finally spoke. Voice cracking. Son. Please. We didn't know. It was Daniel. He told us you were gone. I looked at him. Then why did you sign the transfer papers? Why did you take the money? He faltered, mouth opening and closing. No sound. My mother reached for my arm, tears streaking her makeup. We thought it was what you wanted. We didn't mean for any of this. I stepped back. The flashes kept coming. Cole told me to stay calm. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I expected. I was hollow, watching them crumble under the weight of their own lies. The judge cleared his throat, his voice firm. Mr. Cole, detain everyone connected to these documents pending investigation. Mr. Reed, you will accompany us for formal verification. Cole nodded and put a hand on my shoulder. I turned once more to face the crowd. Everyone here today just witnessed the truth. They tried to bury me with their greed. Now they get to live with it. As we walked down the aisle, reporters shouted questions. How did you survive? Where were you? Do you plan to press charges? I didn't answer. The rain started again outside. Soft and cold. The same as the day I washed up on the beach. Cole opened the car door for me. You did good, he said quietly. This won't be pretty. But it's over. I looked back at the church doors. The sound inside was chaos again. Voices, yelling. Cameras flashing. My family, the people I once built my world around, were no longer family. They were strangers bound by fear. In the car, the city lights slid across the window. Cole spoke into his radio. Reporting arrests. I watched the raindrops chase each other down the glass and thought about Jacob's words on the island. The sea spits out the ones who aren't finished. When we reached the bureau office, they led me through the back entrance to avoid the press. I sat in a small interview room while Cole handled the paperwork. My hands trembled now that the adrenaline was gone. The reality of what I had done settled in slow and heavy. Cole came back after an hour, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You sure you're ready to face them again in court? He asked. I stared at the steam rising from the cup. I've been facing them my whole life. This time, I just have witnesses. He nodded and slid a folder toward me. These are the confirmed results. Everything checks out. You're officially alive again. He paused, then added quietly, you also just made enemies with people who don't forgive easily. I smiled without looking up. They already tried to kill me once. What's left to lose? He didn't answer, just stood and left me alone. I sat there a long time, staring at the papers that gave me my name back. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. Outside, I could hear the distant rumble of thunder rolling in from the sound. The storm was coming. But this time, I wasn't the one who needed to be afraid. The first morning after the funeral felt unreal. I woke up in a bureau guest apartment. Sunlight bleeding through half-closed blinds. The air too still for comfort. For the first time in months, I was legally alive. But I didn't feel human yet. My name was back on paper. But the weight of what had happened clung to me like salt on skin. Cole came by before breakfast, holding a folder and 2 coffees. He dropped the folder on the table and sat across from me. The investigation's moving fast. The judge issued warrants last night. Daniel, your parents, and Halden are all under federal review. Emily's been detained for questioning. She's already trying to negotiate. I didn't ask how. I just stared at the steam curling from the cup. She always knew how to make a deal. Cole studied me for a moment. You'll have to testify. This isn't optional. It'll be brutal. I said I was ready. He nodded and stood. The press will have your name by noon. After that, you won't get a quiet minute. He paused by the door. You did the right thing. But that doesn't mean it'll feel good. When he left, I opened the folder. Photos. Financial trails. Transcripts of wiretaps. Every lie they'd told was here in black and white. I ran my fingers over my forged signature. The same one that almost erased my life. It looked perfect until you stared long enough. By noon, the first reporters had gathered outside the bureau building. Headlines flashed on every screen. Michael Reed returns from the dead. Family accused of fraud and conspiracy. I turned off the TV and waited. The hearing came a week later. Federal courthouse. Downtown Seattle. The air inside buzzed with whispers. Cameras were banned. But the smell of news still hung in the hallways. Cole walked beside me. His tone low and steady. Just stick to what you know. No speculation. No emotion, if you can help it. I almost laughed. Emotion was the only thing keeping me standing. The courtroom felt smaller than I remembered. My parents sat together at the defense table, pale and aged. My father's hands trembled. My mother clutched a rosary, her lips moving silently. Daniel sat 2 seats away, eyes hollow, jaw tight. Emily sat at the end, back straight, expression unreadable. When the judge entered, everyone rose. I stared at the wooden bench where my future used to be decided by shareholders. Now, by law. The prosecutor began with the evidence. The forged coroner's report. The bank transfers. The fake power of attorney. Cole's voice played over the speakers, explaining the insurance company's investigation. Then it was my turn. I took the stand and looked out at faces that used to define my world. My voice felt steady, detached, like it belonged to someone else. I described the dive, the hiss from the valve, the suffocation, the island, Jacob saving me, the discovery of the fraud. Every word scraped something raw inside me. But I didn't stop. When I finished, the defense attorney stood. He was smooth, rehearsed. Mr. Reed, isn't it true that you suffered trauma and possible hallucinations after your accident? That perhaps your memory is unreliable? I met his eyes. I don't remember everything, just the sound of the air leaving my tank and the way my brother looked at me when it happened. That's not something you forget. The courtroom went still. Daniel's face flushed red. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering fast. My father buried his face in his hands. My mother wept quietly. Then Emily rose for her own testimony. She walked to the stand like she was entering a gala. confident, controlled. Her voice was calm. I didn't know he was alive. I mourned him. If mistakes were made, they were Daniel's, not mine. The prosecutor slid a photo across the table. It showed her and Halden at the investor dinner, laughing, his hand on her waist. The timestamp was 2 weeks after my death. Her face twitched. Just slightly. The prosecutor asked if she still denied involvement. She hesitated, then said softly that grief makes people do strange things. The courtroom murmured. I sat motionless. The judge called a recess. Outside the courtroom, Cole lit a cigarette he wasn't supposed to have. He looked at me. She's cracking. Halden's already talking, trying to save himself. He's saying Daniel arranged the whole thing. I leaned against the wall. That's not true. They all did. He nodded slowly. Then the storm will swallow all of them. When court resumed, Halden took the stand. He looked thinner, desperate. His lawyer whispered to him, but he ignored it. He said Daniel had approached him months before the trip, offering partial control of Reed Tech after my death. He said Emily was aware of the plan, that my parents agreed to sign the inheritance paperwork once the insurance money cleared. Daniel shouted that he was lying, that Halden forged the messages. The judge slammed his gavel. Order. The prosecutor played an audio file from the investigation. Daniel's voice, clear and panicked. From the coffee shop conversation I'd recorded. You finish the merger, and we're all done. You open your mouth. You lose everything. He went silent. My mother sobbed openly. My father stared at the floor. The verdict came 2 days later. Halden guilty of fraud and conspiracy. Emily guilty of perjury and collusion. Daniel guilty of attempted manslaughter. My parents charged as accessories in the cover-up, but spared prison due to cooperation. When the gavel fell for the last time, I felt no triumph. Just a strange, hollow quiet. The kind that follows storms. Afterward, Cole met me on the courthouse steps. Reporters waited behind barricades. You're free, he said. Reed Tech is officially yours again. I nodded, staring at the skyline beyond the cameras. Seattle looked different now. Sharp-edged and clean, as if it had shed its old skin. I asked what would happen to them. Cole shrugged. Halden's done. Emily might serve 2 years. Daniel's looking at 15. Your parents will lose everything. I thought of the house I'd bought them, the allowance I'd sent every month, the years I believed loyalty was love. They wanted my empire. And now they had nothing but ashes. Karma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just whispers quietly while everything falls apart. That night, I went back to my office for the first time since the trial. The lights were dim, the halls silent. My name had already been reinstalled on the door. I ran my hand over the letters. For a long time, I just stood there, inside. The office looked almost the same. My old desk, the framed photos, even the coffee mug Daniel gave me years ago. I sat down and opened my laptop. Emails flooded in. Congratulations. Interview requests. Business offers. I closed them all. I turned instead to the window. The city stretched below, lights flickering on the water. I thought of Jacob's Island, the wind on my face, the quiet that had once saved me. I whispered into the empty room that I hoped he was proud. Behind me. The phone rang. It was Tom. He said quietly that people were calling it a miracle, that the story had already gone national. I told him it wasn't a miracle. It was survival. When I hung up, the rain started again. Soft against the glass. I let it fall, watching it trace slow rivers down the window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. Only a strange kind of peace. Outside, a single car pulled away from the courthouse, headlights fading into the mist. Somewhere inside it, my family was scattering into different corners of the world, trying to outrun their own choices. I didn't follow. The truth had caught them already. I stayed there in the dark office until the rain stopped and dawn began to color the water. The world was quiet again. And for once, I was too. By the time the sky turned pink over the bay, the office felt like a confession booth. I sat in the half-light and listened to the hum of the building waking up. Phones started ringing somewhere down the hall. Footsteps echoed faintly on the polished floor. Life was moving on. But I was still catching up to it. A week had passed since the verdict. Yet I hadn't been home. My apartment was gone. Sold during probate. I didn't have the courage to step into a place that reminded me of Emily's perfume or Daniel's laughter at our dinner table. So, I stayed at a hotel downtown. Close enough to the company but far enough from the ghosts. That morning, I finally decided to go back. Not home. Exactly. But somewhere that still felt like the start of all of this. I packed a single bag, took a taxi to the harbor, and boarded a small ferry heading west toward Bainbridge Island. The water was calm, silver under the rising sun. Seattle shrank behind me until the skyline blurred. When the boat docked, I rented a car and drove north along the coast until I reached a quiet cove. The air smelled like pine and salt. It reminded me of St. Tonio's, Winslow, where Jacob had pulled me from the sea. I hadn't told anyone about him. Not Cole. Not even Tom. Some debts are too personal to share. There was a small cemetery near the edge of the cliff. I found his grave easily. A simple wooden cross with his name carved by hand. Jacob Miles. Sailor. Friend. Believer in second chances. Someone had placed a small bouquet of wildflowers there. Probably one of the locals he used to trade fish with. I knelt, brushed the sand from the letters, and spoke softly. You were right. The ocean doesn't forgive hesitation. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of waves breaking below. For a while, I just listened, breathing in the peace that always seemed to follow him. Then I set a folded paper beside the flowers. A note I'd written on the ferry. It said, "Thank you for saving me twice." When I stood, the sky had cleared completely. The horizon was sharp and bright. I could see freighters in the distance, moving like slow thoughts. I drove back into town and stopped by a small diner overlooking the water. The waitress recognized me from the news but didn't say anything. She poured coffee and slid the plate of pancakes in front of me like I was any other man. It was the best meal I'd had in months. While I ate, I opened my laptop and read through the last reports from Cole. Halden had confessed to everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. Emily had pleaded guilty to obstruction. Daniel was being transferred to federal custody for mental evaluation before trial. My parents had sold the family house to pay restitution. The circle was closing. When I finished my coffee, I logged into ReadTech's server. The company was running again. Stronger than ever. Employees had started sending messages of support. Some saying they were proud to work for a man who came back from the dead. That made me smile. But it also made me tired. Survival shouldn't make someone a hero. It just means you refuse to stop breathing. By afternoon, I was back on the ferry to Seattle. The city shimmered in the distance. A mirror of glass and memory. I wasn't going to stay there long. I had already made arrangements with Tom and the board. I was stepping down as CEO. ReadTech would continue without me. This time, as a foundation supporting people cheated by the system. The way I had been, the lawyers had drawn up the paperwork. The name would stay. But the purpose would change. When I told Cole, he said it was poetic. I said it was necessary. You can't rebuild something clean from the same ruins that almost buried you. Later that evening, I visited my parents. They were living in a small apartment near Tacoma. Quiet. Unassuming. My mother opened the door slowly, her eyes swollen from crying. My father stood behind her, looking older, smaller. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then she whispered that she was sorry. He nodded without lifting his eyes. I didn't yell. I didn't forgive either. I told them I wanted peace. Not revenge anymore. They had lost enough. We talked for an hour about nothing and everything. When I left, my mother touched my arm gently, like she used to when I was a boy. I didn't pull away. That was enough. The sun was setting by the time I drove back into the city. I stopped by the waterfront park near the old pier. The air smelled of rain and gasoline. Families were walking their dogs. Couples holding hands. Kids running past me. It all felt so normal, it almost hurt. I sat on a bench and watched the sky fade from gold to gray. The wind off the sound was cold. But it felt clean. For the first time in years, there was no one chasing me. No one waiting to stab me in the back. No ghosts left to haunt my nights. I pulled a notebook from my bag. The one I used to keep ideas in back when I still dreamed about new inventions. On the first clean page, I wrote a single line. The truth always finds its way back to the surface. Then I closed it and set it beside me. A young man walking by stopped and asked if I was the guy from the news. I laughed quietly and said I used to be. He nodded awkwardly and walked on. When the street lights flickered on, I stood and faced the water. The reflection of the city trembled across the waves. Alive and restless. I thought about Jacob again. About the night he told me that the ocean only gives back those who still have something left to do. I wasn't sure what that was yet. Maybe it was learning how to live without anger. Maybe it was helping others who had been betrayed. Maybe it was just breathing without guilt. Whatever it was, I knew I wasn't finished. I left the notebook on the bench, zipped my jacket, and started walking. The rain began again, soft and steady. The city lights blurred around me, and the sound of the water followed like a heartbeat. If there's one thing I learned, it's that truth doesn't drown. It waits. It surfaces when the tide turns, no matter how deep you try to bury it. And when it comes up for air, it takes everything false with it. So if you're listening to this, wherever you are, remember this much. You can lose everything. You can be betrayed, forgotten, buried in lies. But if you keep breathing, if you refuse to sink, the truth will find its way back. That's what saved me. And maybe it can save you too.